Good morning. I'm Erin Hall with Hopeful Horizons, and I am really excited to introduce you to one of our favorite members of the Hopeful Horizons family. This is Joy. And Joy, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about who you are.
All right. Welcome. I'm Joy Peeler. I am a Hilton Head Island native, Beaufort County, up until this year. Now I'm in Colleton County, living in Walterboro, South Carolina. And I am the mother of a 16-year-old. So I have one child, a son who's 16, and just the two of us living up in Walterboro.
That's great. Well, I hope the move to Walterboro has been a good one. So tell us a little bit about, I know your story. I'm very honored to know your story, but tell us a little bit about how you connected with Hopeful Horizons originally.
Yes. 2009 is when the connection really began. But to back up with that, the first time I called Hopeful Horizons was when I was pregnant with my son. And I was in a new relationship, became pregnant right away within that relationship, and knew from the bat something wasn't right with it. I didn't know necessarily if it was what to call it. There wasn't anything physical as far as violence, but I knew I was not being treated properly, and contacted Hopeful Horizons. I was about 6 months pregnant, and there had been an incident that day, and I needed help. And I called Hopeful Horizons, called the hotline, but didn't follow through. And the next time I called Hopeful Horizons, the hotline, my son was 5, and I was still in that abusive relationship. By that point, there was physical mixed with a lot of psychological, verbal, those who are familiar with the term gaslighting. Mm-hmm. And that's when I connected with them, began counseling, and both for myself, going to the women's group, and also got my son working with the children's counselor. And that was in 2009. I was still living with my abuser at the time. And that I think it was about July 2019 that I started counseling. And this was the month that I left, October 2009 that I left. And it was the 6th time I'd left him, and that time I left for good.
Wow. We talk about how many times a survivor leaves before they leave for good. So I'm really glad you said that, because I think it's so important to point that out. And also that you called Hopeful Horizons and were getting help while you were still in the relationship. Like, that's a good message, that you don't have to have left in order to call us and for us to help you.
And I never felt judgment either from the counselor, that I was still living with him, that I loved him. And being torn, all I wanted in the beginning was to help him get past his issues and love him through it. And I thought I could do that living with him, and I thought I could do that for years. But going to counseling opened my eyes to what I was living in, and who he was, and that he was a batterer. He was an abuser. He was not going to change. And as my eyes were opened, I was able to also start developing a safety plan of how to keep myself safe living with him, and also how to be prepared safely to leave him when that time came, when I was ready. And I was able to do that and go to the shelter. I didn't have financial resources, and I was able to just call as soon as he left for work one day after another violent incident, and call and go straight to the shelter.
That's incredible, and good for you that you were able to put together that safety plan to keep you safe and your son safe, and put plans in place for when you would be ready to leave, because we understand you're not ready to leave until you're ready to leave, and that's a really hard decision. So how long were you at our shelter?
I ended up back there again at one point later when I felt unsafe. But when I left the first time, in order to figure out where I'd be able to go next and live, I was there a month and a half. We spent Thanksgiving there. So it was my son and I. We spent Thanksgiving. I think we went home beginning of December.
Okay.
So we were there, and he was still in school. And
wow,
the most incredible memory for me, and one thing I really want women to understand, because I was so torn taking him out of his home, away from his toys, his friends, his neighborhood, everything that was normal to him. And that was one of the hardest things about leaving. And our first afternoon there was a playground at the shelter, and I was pushing him on the slide, and he was just asking to go higher and higher, and he had this big smile on his face, and he said, "Mom, this is the best day ever." And that stuck with me, because to me, I felt I had torn apart his world, and I felt like maybe the best thing to do was to stay in the abuse, to give him normalcy. And I'd grown up with a 2-parent household and keep some normalcy, but that perspective really stuck with me. That kids are resilient, and I needed to make this change for him, and he would adapt.
Yes, that's pretty incredible. And I'm so glad you told that story. The playground is still there, and kids still play on that playground. And I think having a child, as you're making the decision to leave, it is much more difficult when you have a child, because then you're making that decision for 2 people or 3 people. And I can't imagine going through that. But then just your son saying it's the best day ever. I mean, what a great moment to know you did the right thing for both of you.
Yes.
I love that. That's really beautiful. So you sort of talked about this already, but what other messages do you have for victims and survivors? Like, what do you think they need to know about Hopeful Horizons, but also just about leaving and healing and getting out of a bad situation?
It's a long journey. That's one thing to understand and to be realistic about. Having support is huge, and having, not mainly really Hopeful Horizons, having that support, I believe, really helped me survive physically with him, and also helped me begin the process of healing. I also was able to work it out with the legal services, so that I had physical custody of my son. Was able to get an order of protection against him. I had someone go with me to any court hearings. It's a long process, and it's a hard process, and I can't imagine having to have gone through it alone. So finding support, whether it's family, church, and an organization like Hopeful Horizons, is huge, and it will really help with the process and getting through it. I had just because I left him didn't mean that the danger was over, and I'm very grateful that also Hopeful Horizons make use of your local police force, develop a paper trail. I remember that lesson, and it was so true. And develop that paper trail. it does help. It helps in court. It helps with everything, and it helps with being believed. And unfortunately, as abused women, that's something we struggle with, and that's something I struggled with.
Sure.
But finding people you can open up with
Mhm.
also, because we isolate, and that's one powerful tool our abusers use against us is they isolate us,
Mhm.
or they lead us to believe that no one cares about us, or no one's going to believe us, or we're not worth anything. And once you hear that enough times, it's easy to just absorb that and
Yes.
go inside your shell.
Mhm.
But there's power in you, there's power in me, and finding that power within yourself again, believing in yourself again, you can be free. And I wish we as women felt comfortable doing it just for us, but oftentimes as mothers, it takes us waking up to something with our children
Mhm.
to leave. And my son, for instance, he was 5, and my abuser was a third generation abuser. His father had been abusive, his
Wow.
grandfather had been abusive. Not a, and an interesting statistic, unfortunately, is my son's father grew up to be an abuser, and his sister was murdered by her husband. So the statistic of growing up in an abusive household, and the women often end up in abusive relationships, and the boys can often fall into that same pattern of being abusers. It shook me. And as he was getting a little older, I was very aware that this is the 4th generation. I've got to do something. But I wish we women took as much stock in ourselves and not just our children to get out. But whatever it takes to leave, that's the important thing.
Mhm. I think you also hit on a lot of points of gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. When you hear the same thing over and over and over, you start to
Yes.
believe it. And I think we see a lot of women who struggle to figure out who's in their support group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I think you are exactly right that it's your contacts at Hopeful Horizons, but it's that really good friend who believes you. It's that family member who believes you, and then the paper trail is another layer that the paper trail helps you believe
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and see it in a different way.
Yeah, there's times where even today that I have to remind myself that what happened was real, because I'm always connected to him because of
Sure.
my son. And there still are times where he tries to get back in my head and tell me it's all in my head, and that I spun things around in a way that didn't happen. And it's amazing how powerful those psychological abuse is even years later. So yes, anything like that that reminds you of reality is huge.
Yes. And one of the things with our therapists at Hopeful Horizons is you can always come back. So when you have that doubt in your mind, for anyone who is watching this, call Hopeful Horizons again, connect with your therapist, come in for a kind of a re-energization to what you said, find that power in yourself again and remember that you did this for you and you are worth it.
The support group is good like that too. I've gone back from time to time just to pop in for a session, because no matter how different our stories are, they're also so alike. And it's so comforting to be surrounded by others who get it. And that too is a very helpful tool.
Absolutely. So our support group has gone virtual, We are now doing an online chat, so it is completely anonymous. There's no video, no audio, it's just chat. And I'll post a link when we share this conversation today, because you're right, the women who come to support group really can benefit both from having the therapist there, but like you said, there's other women that are in your same position who can relate to what you're going through. And sometimes the advice from another survivor is exactly what you needed at that moment. So in terms of support, talk to me about friends and family, and what advice do you have for friends and family? How can a good friend help a survivor or someone who's still in the relationship?
Yeah, I think that's an important lesson, and I know it can be so frustrating as a friend or family as to what to do. It's a very hopeless feeling. Number one, believe them. That's the key. Believe them. Be an ear they can turn to. Be ready to support them however they need it. If they're ready to get out, be ready to help. Don't say you're going to help and then, oh, I can't. But be careful also. It's one of the most dangerous times for a woman when they leave. So be careful as to really encourage them to seek professional help in the sense of an organization like Hopeful Horizons, or someone who is equipped and able to help them safely if they are and when they're ready to leave. Love them through it. It is an extremely lonely time when you're living with an abuser. There's so many reasons why a woman stays, or why an abused individual stays, more than anyone on the outside can fathom. So really love them through it, be there for them, and be ready to help however they may need it.
Great, thank you. So for those of you who don't know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and one of the things that we are really emphasizing this month is how to help a victim, a survivor. And so this is really key. I think your number one thing, to believe them. That is just, we can't emphasize that enough. Believe them. So tell us, what does the future look like for Joy? You have a new place to live. You're in Walterboro. I feel like the future is very bright.
The future is bright. And on top of a son, now I have 3 stepdaughters. So that's new and exciting. So I have a 9-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 22-year-old.
Wow.
So that's been fun.
Good. I can see your face light up as you're talking about this. So that tells me so much.
Yeah, and married a head football coach. So first home game tonight at Colleton County High School.
Oh, exciting.
So that'll be fun. So we bought a house here and really making a home here for Duncan and I, and just getting started with life here, and not sure what all the future will hold down the road, but it's a good one.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's, I think one of my favorite parts of being with Hopeful Horizons is getting to talk to people like you and hearing the good things that are happening now. And it just, it reminds me of how hard the work is when you're when you are a victim, and how hard the work is when you're a survivor, but that there is so much bright light at the end of that tunnel. And I love hearing the stories of how well our people are doing who've worked with us. It's awesome. So anything else that you want to share? Anything else you think that people need to know?
Well, one interesting thing that I was thinking about the other day is it's hard work, and healing is hard work, and you always hear it. It's not linear. And
Right.
I want to encourage survivors to accept that and do the work. For instance, this is year year 10 for me since the most
Wow.
traumatic event with my batterer. And I have a trigger that comes with cold weather in the winter months. So once nightfall happens earlier during cold season, there's a trigger. And I've worked through a lot of mine. That's one I still have. So I go back usually to do a little bit of therapy, and often EMDR, which is something that's used with PTSD, and do that when this season changes, because I recognize it's just there, and it's gotten better over the years, but it's still something I struggle with. So healing is not linear, and you can do it, and you can do the work, and it's better to work through it than to push it down. And it's worth it for yourself, for your family, to do the work, and you can do it.
You can. And triggers are very real. And just being able to identify what the triggers are is a huge piece of that work. So good for you for knowing that that's still a trigger, and you have steps to address it as we come up on that season. I know that's gotta still be really hard, but you just take it one day at a time sometimes.
Exactly.
Good for you. Good for you. All right. Well, Joy, thank you so much for sharing your story and giving some great advice to friends and family and victims and survivors. And you are a thriver, and it's amazing. I love chatting with you. So thank you. And we wish you the best of luck with all that's happening in your world, all the new stuff, and hope your team wins tonight.
Yes. Go Cougars.
Go Cougars.